We have built our relationships on a foundation of lies, declared psychologist Carl Jung nearly a century ago. And then we wonder why they crumble beneath the weight of our expectations. You walk into every relationship carrying an invisible burden, the myth that someone else can complete you. This isn't romantic wisdom, it's psychological poison. Yet everywhere you look, this toxic narrative is being sold to you as truth. From Hollywood's endless parade of soulmate stories to the self-help industry's promise of finding your other half, you've been conditioned to believe that love means dependency, that intimacy requires the surrender of your individual self. But what if everything you've been taught about relationships is backwards? What if the very thing you think will save your relationship, this desperate need to merge, to become one, is precisely what's killing it? Jung understood something that modern culture has forgotten. Two people cannot become whole by joining their brokenness together. You cannot build a healthy relationship from an unhealthy foundation. Yet this is exactly what we do, over and over again, creating partnerships that are less about love and more about mutual addiction. The statistics don't lie. Divorce rates hover around 50%. Even those who stay together often live in quiet desperation, going through the motions of connection while feeling more alone than ever. We're more connected than any generation in history, yet loneliness has become an epidemic. Why? Because we've confused attachment with love, neediness with intimacy, and codependence with commitment. The ancient Greeks had multiple words for love: eros, philia, agape, understanding that different relationships require different qualities. We've reduced this rich vocabulary to a single word that means everything and nothing. We use love to describe both the deepest spiritual connection and the most shallow infatuation. No wonder we're confused. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what you call love isn't love at all. It's projection, fantasy, and unmet childhood needs, dressed up in romantic clothing. And until you face this reality, you'll continue to create relationships that feel more like prisons than partnerships. Consider this. When was the last time you entered a relationship from a place of genuine curiosity about another person, rather than from a place of need? When did you last love someone for who they actually were, rather than for how they made you feel about yourself? If you're honest, and honesty is the only way through this maze, you'll realize that most of your relationships have been elaborate performances designed to get your needs met while avoiding the terrifying work of actually knowing yourself. The modern dating culture has weaponized this dysfunction. Dating apps reduce human beings to consumable products. Social media creates artificial scarcity and endless comparison. The entire system is designed to keep you hungry, desperate, and settling for connections that feel more like business transactions than human bonds. You swipe, you match, you perform, you disappoint, you move on. Rinse and repeat until you're exhausted and cynical, wondering if real love even exists anymore. Understanding our psychological patterns. Every relationship begins with a projection. You meet someone, and within moments your unconscious mind starts writing a story about who they are. Not based on evidence, but on your deepest needs, fears, and fantasies. You're not falling in love with them. You're falling in love with your projection of them. This is what Jung called the anima and animus, the unconscious masculine and feminine aspects within each of us that we project onto potential partners. When you feel that instant attraction, that sense that you've found your person, what you're actually experiencing is the recognition of your own missing pieces reflected back at you. Think about your last relationship. In the beginning, didn't your partner seem almost magical? Didn't they appear to possess exactly the qualities you felt you lacked? The extrovert who made your introverted heart sing. The free spirit who promised to liberate your rigid routines. The stable presence who seemed to offer security for your chaotic inner world. But here's where it gets interesting and tragic. The same qualities that initially attracted you inevitably become the source of your greatest conflicts. The extrovert becomes too social. The free spirit becomes irresponsible. The stable presence becomes boring. Why? because you were never actually attracted to them as they truly were. You were attracted to what you needed them to represent. This is the projection trap, and it's inescapable until you become conscious of it. You enter relationships not to know another person, but to avoid knowing yourself. You seek in others what you refuse to develop within yourself. The result? Every relationship becomes a battleground between reality and fantasy, between who your partner actually is and who you need them to be. But the projection works both ways. Just as you're casting them in a role they never auditioned for, they're doing the same to you. Both of you are performing for an audience that doesn't exist, trying to live up to expectations that were never realistic. You're both exhausted, frustrated, and confused about why love feels so hard. The cruel irony is that the more you try to change your partner into your projection, the more they resist. The more they resist, the more you feel rejected and misunderstood. What you interpret as incompatibility is often just the inevitable collision between two sets of unrealistic expectations. This is why the honeymoon phase always ends. It's not that the love dies, it's that the projections finally meet reality. Consider the architecture of modern romance. You present your best self, they present theirs, and you both fall in love with these curated versions. Social media has amplified this to absurd proportions. You're not just competing with who your partner actually is, you're competing with the highlight reels of every other person they follow online. Everyone is performing their best life, while privately struggling with the gap between image and reality. The shadow side of projection is equally destructive. Not only do you project your idealized qualities onto your partner, but you also project your disowned darkness. The parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge suddenly appear in them, and you hate them for it. Your own repressed anger shows up as their aggression. Your own hidden selfishness manifests as their narcissism. Your own fear of intimacy becomes their emotional unavailability. This psychological drama plays out in every relationship until you develop the courage to see clearly. The person you're fighting with isn't really your partner. It's your own unconscious material dressed up in their clothes. The relationship becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting back everything you refuse to face about yourself. The path to authentic connection. Here's what no one tells you about successful relationships. They're not built by two people who need each other, but by two people who choose each other. There's a profound difference between need and choice, between attachment and love, between codependence and commitment. The ancient Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote about love as an act of will, not a feeling that happens to you. When you love from need, you're always afraid. Afraid of loss, of abandonment, of not being enough. When you love from choice, you're free to love fully because you're not dependent on the outcome. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole within yourself. Only when you've done your own psychological work can you enter a relationship as a complete person, rather than as half a person seeking your missing piece. This doesn't mean you don't need connection. Humans are inherently social beings. It means your need for connection comes from abundance, not scarcity. Think about the relationships you admire most. Aren't they between people who clearly maintain their individual identities while choosing to share their lives? They support each other without losing themselves. They can be apart without falling apart. They enhance each other's lives without being essential to each other's survival. This is sovereignty in relationship, the ability to be fully yourself while being fully present with another. It requires a fundamental shift in how you think about love. Instead of asking, "What can this person do for me?" you start asking, "What can I contribute to this connection?" Sovereign individuals don't eliminate their needs. They take responsibility for meeting those needs in healthy ways. They have multiple sources of validation, support, and joy. They've developed their own interests, friendships, and internal resources. They enter relationships from a place of fullness, not emptiness. This terrifies most people because it challenges the romantic mythology that says love should make you dependent. But here's the paradox. The more independent you become, the more capacity you have for true intimacy. When you're not desperately clutching onto someone, You can actually see them clearly. When you're not performing for approval, you can be authentic. When you're not afraid of abandonment, you can love without conditions. The sovereign approach to relationships requires courage because it means giving up the fantasy of being rescued. It means accepting that no one is coming to save you. And that's actually the most liberating realization you can have. But sovereignty isn't selfishness. It's the opposite. When you're not frantically trying to get your needs met through another person, you become capable of genuine generosity. You can give without keeping score. You can love without attachment to outcomes. You can be present without agenda. This shift from scarcity to abundance changes everything. Jealousy transforms from a destructive force into useful information about your own insecurities. Conflict becomes an opportunity for deeper understanding rather than a threat to the relationship. Your partner's growth becomes something to celebrate rather than something to fear. The path to sovereignty requires brutal honesty about your patterns. You must identify the ways you've been using relationships to avoid yourself. You must face the childhood wounds that drive your adult behavior. You must develop the capacity to self-soothe, self-validate, and self-actualize. This work isn't easy, and it's not quick. It requires therapy, self-reflection, and often years of dedicated inner work. But the alternative is continuing to create relationships that are based on mutual need rather than mutual choice. And we've all seen how that story ends. Sovereignty doesn't mean you don't need people. It means you need people from a place of strength rather than weakness. You enter relationships to share your fullness, not to fill your emptiness. You love because you choose to, not because you have to. Creating relationships that last. Imagine a relationship where both people show up as their full, authentic selves, not perfect but whole. Where conflicts become opportunities for deeper understanding rather than threats to the connection. Where growth is celebrated, even when it means growing in different directions. Where love is expressed through freedom, not control. This isn't fantasy. It's what becomes possible when two sovereign individuals choose to build something together. But it requires a complete paradigm shift in how we think about partnership. First, you must abandon the myth of forever. Promising to love someone forever is beautiful in theory, but it creates pressure that often destroys the very thing it's meant to preserve. Instead, commit to loving fully in the present moment and renew that choice daily. This creates space for genuine connection to unfold naturally. Second, embrace the reality of change. You're not the same person you were 5 years ago, and neither is your partner. Relationships fail when we expect people to remain static. Successful relationships are built by people who are committed to growing together, even when that growth is uncomfortable or unpredictable. Third, maintain your individual identity. The strongest relationships are between people who have rich, full lives outside the partnership. Cultivate your own interests, friendships, and dreams. Your relationship should enhance your life, not consume it. Fourth, communicate from authenticity, not strategy. Stop trying to manage your partner's reactions. Stop walking on eggshells. Start saying what you actually think and feel. Yes, this will create conflict sometimes, but authentic conflict in a safe relationship leads to deeper intimacy, while false harmony leads to slow death. Finally, release the need to be right. Every relationship becomes a war zone when both people are more committed to being right than to being connected. Practice the radical humility of admitting when you're wrong, and the radical generosity of allowing your partner to be human. The relationships that thrive in our era will be built by people who understand that love is not a feeling, but a practice. It's not something that happens to you, but something you consciously create, day after day, choice after choice. This new paradigm isn't easier than the old one, it's harder. It requires more self-awareness, more emotional intelligence, more courage. But it leads to something that the old paradigm never could: genuine intimacy between two people who are free to leave but choose to stay. The question isn't whether you can find the right person. The question is whether you can become the right person. Someone capable of loving from wholeness rather than brokenness, from choice rather than need, from sovereignty rather than dependency. But let's be clear about what this looks like in practice. In the new paradigm, you don't fight about whose turn it is to take out the trash. You create systems that work for both of you. You don't argue about how to spend money. You align on values and make decisions together. You don't compete for who's busier or more stressed. You support each other's goals and celebrate each other's successes. When one person wants to pursue a new opportunity that might require sacrifice from both, it becomes a conversation about shared values rather than a battle of competing needs. When attraction to others naturally arises, because it will, it becomes information to understand rather than a threat to hide from. The new paradigm acknowledges that relationships exist within the context of full human lives. Your partner isn't responsible for your happiness, your fulfillment, or your sense of self-worth. They're your companion on the journey, not your destination. They're your teammate, not your completion. This requires a fundamental rewiring of how you think about commitment. Instead of promising to never change, you promise to communicate honestly about how you're changing. Instead of vowing to always put the relationship first, you commit to being a person worth relating to. Instead of guaranteeing forever, you dedicate yourself to making today meaningful. That's where real love begins. Not in finding your other half, but in becoming whole enough to love another whole person. Not in losing yourself in someone else, but in being so fully yourself that you have something authentic to share. The age of desperate love is ending. The age of sovereign love is beginning. The question is, are you ready to love like you've never been taught? Are you willing to do the terrifying, exhilarating work of becoming someone capable of real intimacy? Are you prepared to release the fantasy of being saved and embrace the reality of being free? Because that's what awaits on the other side of this transformation. Not the perfect relationship, but the capacity for real love. Not the end of loneliness, but the beginning of true connection. Not the completion of yourself, but the full expression of who you already are. The choice, as always, is yours, but choose wisely, because the relationships you create from this point forward will either be prisons built from fear or partnerships built from freedom. And only you can decide which story you're ready to live.